Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes doing the right thing means doing the hard thing, means doing the unpopular thing, and oftentimes means doing something that might upset some people who voted you into power. This is similar to taking medicine in order to get better and to grow, in order to be able to move on from the very painful past that we believe has to be able to be challenged. Democracy and freedom are not absolute, and this is a direct response to what opening opposition claims and asserts. They think that because you were a democracy, because you were elected, things are fine and dandy, but we tell you the reality is far from it. Which is why we need fetters and restraint to be able to protect the very people who we think voted us into power in the first place. The parallel here, ladies and gentlemen, is when democracies like in the Philippines and in Burma enacted martial law in order to protect the state against communism and threats against rebel groups. The state enacted fetters of democracy to curtail in freedom in order to do things like restrict mobility and access to some places in order to protect public safety. We believe censorship is a stone's throw away of that in order to be able to prevent even having to have martial law in order to protect the state from dangerous ideology. Dangerous ideology in a post-conflict state wherein you have a lot of controversial ideologies coming from the very violent and fragmented past. You probably killed certain leaders in order to get the elections you are at right now, and their very cronies and people who were a beneficiary of their nepotism are probably in hiding, waiting for a very vulnerable opportunity to come back from the shadows and be able to harm you. We think this looks like a couple of things. We see a huge perpetuation in fighting within particular communities, wherein militia and freedom fighters, the very people who coalesce together to form the newly found state, are largely fragmented. We think that any form of power vacuum becomes an opportunity for any incumbent to try and grab power. Why? Who are these very people we're trying to curtail and protect against? Supporters of the old regime, ladies and gentlemen. People who I mentioned in my pre-oration, who you toppled but are still alive. They are lurking in the shadows, ladies and gentlemen. And anytime there's an opening, they can use print media, online media, social media, AI to be able to resurge and undermine the legitimacy of your newly found democracy and state. This looks like things like fake news and historical revisionism, to be even publishing dangerous ideologies to undermine the very people you have in power. Books and art and all of these things are embodiments of ideologies which are carried and spread throughout society, and we think it's too risky to allow a lot of these things to curtail. Sure, the trade-off we're willing to make is fucking people might not be able to express themselves and do that, but we think safety comes a prerequisite in order to be able to protect these individuals. This is because a lot of these potential dangerous individuals are bound up in relations of power, of cronyism and nepotism, which are definitely entrenched. It might have been better, but are still probably there. Secondly, and this is a vertical extension of our opening, how does strong censorship look like and why is it important? Opening government legit said, I'll save that for later, of which became an opportunity for OP to question that, but here am I to talk about it. We believe in a hard and soft censorship. It can look like a couple of things. A, classification of government documents in order to prevent data leaks on the local and national level. B, restricting freedom of speech in all ways, shapes, and forms, especially in the media and social media, to be able to prevent dangerous ideologies and people misunderstanding what's happening, to be able to deal with what's really happening. And C, controlling the ideologies we perpetuate. What is our counterfactual? We want to forward ideas of patriotism and nationalism in order to promote a sense of national identity through cultures and symbols. We're looking at what we did, and we think we're here to forward look at what can be and leave behind certain elements of the past. Number 3, how exactly are we going to transition from a post-colonial state to a more established but nascent democracy? Because we recognize a transitory period. This is me extending opening deadlock and talking to you about the process with the ultimate impact and goal of forming a state and being able to establish a sense of national identity. This can only happen as a consequence of having a collective and shared identity, which can only happen if you aren't fragmented. And we think that the belief in nationalism can uniquely happen only in which people are able to see the commonality. When you allow people from the shadows to be able to throw back at the genocide you're trying to move away from, or being able to undermine the legitimacy because they're kind of salty and they were actually cronies of the people you took out in power, is a point in which you have a hodgepodge of cultures and ideology, which you have to galvanize and mold in order to coalesce into something unified. What got you here right now is messy. Where you came from was messy. If you don't want the future to be messy, to some extent, you have to curtail on people's capacity. Go for it.
I'm unsure where dissent goes away. Rebels still exist. People are still going against you. You might not will live up. People will still exchange ideas. You just hold on a public idea.
That's exactly the point. That's the point. If you concede and characterize it to be a volatile situation and you question us for doing things like genocide and shit, we think the first step is being able to curtail on information to make sure that these bad guys aren't able to coalesce and talk together and spread ideology and say where they're going to take the hostages, how they're going to steal the money using crypto, who they're going to target, etc. In fact, when you were able to classify those particular individuals, we can actually red tag them to be able to get the solvency we want. Therefore, censorship is important. But we're willing to bite the bullet, yes. We're willing to go through martial law as it's consistent with our principle in order to be able to deal with the violence that you claim to exist. Opening opposition talks about having a popular vote. And we think in order to actually cater to those very people who voted you in power, you need to be able to infringe on certain freedoms. It's safe to assume that in your campaign, you talked about making challenging decisions, and this becomes part and parcel of testing a democracy and becomes the ultimate stress test as to where you are within that nascent landscape. And we believe that in a democracy, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't only like it when it's convenient. These are the medicine, these are the hard parts, and we think censorship is the way to go. We are very proud to stand inside government.